Why, hello there. Today we are going to talk about everything I read in the month of May. So let's get into it right now. For the month of May, I read 10 books. The first one was The Devil's Pocketbook by Ross Jeffrey. This is an indie horror book, and it's about this couple named Eric and Laura, and they are going through this immense and hard time full of grief because they've lost a child that, as their doctor said to them, was incompatible with life. This is pretty much just like torn their relationship apart, and it's really sad and intense, and so they're like, we need to take a vacation and just get away from everything, get away from people, you know, coming up to us and asking how our daughter is. It doesn't know that she passed away, so we don't have to deal with that. Trying to refine ourselves and refine us. So they go on vacation, and they go to the seaside town, and they're out by the sea. And one day in the sea, this strange thing, this pod, floats kind of near the shore or wherever they are, and it's called the Devil's Pocketbook. And within it, they find a child. And they're like, is this some strange miracle or blessing that this child is coming to our life? But you know, it's a horror book, so you know it's gonna go all kinds of sideways. And it's such a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it so much. If you like folk horror and horror by the sea and just a very immersive story, The Devil's Pocketbook by Ross Jeffrey is absolutely fantastic. And the foreword is written by Josh Malerman, for any of you Malermaniacs out there. The next thing I read was The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor. And this is like a sci-fi fantasy book. And it's this book about this colony of octopus that are found. They have their own language and society, and so they've been discovered, and there's this scientist that's going to come and study them, and she's not all sure that she actually believes that this is the real thing, but then she gets there and find out it is, and it's about her and this small group of people trying to keep the outside world from coming in and like destroying everything they're trying to discover and try to connect and somehow speak with these octopuses. And it was such a fascinating and interesting story, and it was really heartfelt and emotional. The only thing about it that might turn people off is like it's real clunky between chapters because you're bouncing back and forth between all these different characters in the story of like what's going on. But that didn't bother me too much, but I could see how it could bother some people. Overall, just really fantastic read. The next thing I read was Stories from Somewhere in the Skies by Ryan Sprague. And this is a book, it's nonfiction, and it's about different people's experiences with seeing something strange in the sky, UFOs, you know, unidentified objects and whatnot. And it's broken down into 3 different parts. You have your sightings of like stuff that was just seen, then you have close encounters, possibly seeing some sort of weird entity and whatnot. And then you have the military, like experiences from the military that were near military bases or installments. And these are people who were in the military that have seen things. And it was quite fascinating. And if you have any kind of interest in this subject, Ryan's podcast is pretty awesome. I had listened to a couple episodes after I read the book, and then I just listened to another one the other day that was about the Navajo Rangers. So it was quite fascinating as well. All the stories are really interesting and fascinating. And then with his podcast too, like the way that Ryan is, he seems just like a super nice guy. He lets the people talk. They're able to tell their story really well, so you really get a good feel for what happened and what these people have experienced, and it's quite fascinating. So, and he also has another book that he wrote before this that was called Somewhere in the Skies. And this is the second one, Stories from Somewhere in the Skies. And it's all the stories are taken from the podcast. And it's a great read if you do have an interest in the subject matter of the UFO phenomena. Next up, I read The Haunting of Alejandra by V. Castro. This book is about a woman named Alejandra. The women in her family have had this long-standing, like, horrible depression. They almost seem haunted, and she's going through her own thing where she's kind of like on the edge of being suicidal and depressed, and her husband's super not supportive and just doesn't get it because she tried to talk to him and be like, yeah, I'm kind of this and that, and it doesn't register in his dumb numbskull brain. And her children are driving her crazy, and she can't get a second of peace and quiet. And all of a sudden, this strange entity, who might be La Llorona, starts freaking haunting her, saying, hey, you know, you want to end it? I can help you with that. And so it's the story of her, like, fighting this thing and trying to not be, like, sucked down by the chains of life, her family, and just trying to, like, re-find herself and find enjoyment and try to love her kids again and all of this stuff. And it was a really great story. just the emotions that she went through and trying to like fight to get herself back, to get her kids and to love her kids and to like beat this thing that has been possibly a curse in her family for generations and generations, and her inner strength that she finds. I really liked it. It's not a super long book, somewhere in the realm of 200 plus pages maybe. The next thing I read was From Below by Darcy Coates. I'm laughing because here's my obligatory, I love Darcy Coates. Every time I mention her name, I'm like, I love her. I've only read 3 of her books, and I love the 3 that I read. And From Below, I love underwater horror. I love horror by the sea. It's about this ship called the Arcadia that sunk a long time ago, and it disappeared. People didn't know where it was for like 100 plus years, and they just found it. It's like 300 miles off course. When it sunk, there were these weird SOS messages that they didn't know where their coordinates were. They were like, all these people are dead. And then one of the last ones was, they're in the walls. We don't know how many of them are in the walls. What was in the walls? Well, if you read the book, you find out what was in the walls, because it's still down there. It was creepy. It was atmospheric. For me, the way she writes, it's super addictive. And these books, they keep me up till 4 a.m. I don't know what it is about like her writing that I'm just like, I just need to know what's happening next. Let's go. What's going on? Yeah, I have yet to be disappointed by Darcy Coates' book, but I've only read 3, so you know, there's still time. Hopefully not though. The next thing I read was The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chakshi. This book, I picked it up because I had been hearing about it all over booktube. A lot of people have been talking about it, and a lot of people either really liked it or they didn't like it. I liked it quite a bit. I loved how like dramatic and fantastical it was. The writing was really vibrant and picturesque, and just the words were luscious. It just had really vivid imagery. And it's this story about these 2 girls, Indigo and Azure. Azure disappears, possibly to this place called the Otherworld. And so that's like the whole thing with them. But it starts out with this bridegroom who never has a name, who ends up marrying Indigo. And Indigo is this rich woman from this family who owns these hotel chains, and the hotel chains are all like fairy tale themed. And when she marries this man, she's like, one thing you can never do is never, ever, ever, ever look into my past. And this guy is just like so enraptured and like in love with this mysterious woman who seems so amazing that he's like, okay, yes. But always in the back of your mind, you know all those weird stories about like the serpent woman who asked once a month, please, to her husband, never spy on me while I'm bathing or whatever, because he didn't know, she was half snake or whatever. Or Blackbeard, and was it Bluebeard? One of them pirates told his wife, please do not ever look in this one room, because when she did, they're all the heads of his other ex-wives, and then she was to now join them. But if she hadn't looked, but still, that's pretty effed up. Anyway, so she's like, don't ever look into my family background. Okay, but then her aunt ends up dying, or her aunt is going to die. So they return to the House of Dreams where she grew up, and then the bridegroom is suddenly surrounded by her past. So the temptation is very visceral in there, and obviously he's going to look into her past and find out like what the heck happened. And turns out that Indigo is kind of a really crap bag of a person. That's right, crap bag. And it gets into the whole storyline of that and what happened to Azure and their friendship, and how they were like 2 halves of one soul, but then like what happened when she disappeared and all that. And I thought it was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. Thought it was a fun story. It kept me entertained. It was magical and whimsical in a somewhat realistic and unrealistic way, if that makes any sense. So the next thing I read was Popisho by Leonie Ross. I still don't know if I'm saying the title of that book right, but I read that as a book club read. It's a strange fantasy story. It follows a bunch of different characters, covers a lot of like really important topics, I would say, about like women's rights and different stuff of political nature, life, love, and loss. In this book, the dead, they don't always remain dead. Sometimes they wander around. And so it's about like the political divide. And there's just weird stuff that happens because everyone in Popisho has like cores, which is magic. And so they have these weird magical abilities, and everyone's is kind of different. And then you have this one guy, Xavier Redshoes, and he is this chef called the Mechanus or Mechanus. Still don't know how to say it. I'm not Mechanus. Yeah, Mechanus. He makes one meal for each person in just a random order, and it's usually like one of the best meals anyone's ever had. And like he seasons stuff with his hands, so that's like his magical power. And so everyone has like a different magical power, and it kind of follows like his wife passed away and the story of them and why they were together. There's some other characters like the woman that he had loved before and truly loved, and her and what happened with her, and then all these other different interesting elements that come into it that at first I was like, I'm not liking this. It took me about 100 pages to get into the vibe of the story. It's one of those books too that's in like the dialect of that place. And so it has kind of like, you have to get into that vibe and feeling. And then once you can get into the dance of it and some of the like almost lyrical way it's written and settle into the strangeness and the weird stuff of what's happening, like it became really enjoyable to read. And I know I'm not describing it really well, but it's a really hard book to describe, and I liked it quite a bit. So Puppy Joe, Leonie Ross, it's a fun time, and if you do read it, like I said, it might take you a while to get into it. Maybe you won't like it, maybe you really will love it, I don't know. Next up, we have Cursed Bread by Sophie McIntosh, and this book is long listed for the Women's Fiction Prize. It's a story, what the synopsis says, it's a story about this woman, Elodie, who longs to be seen and to be like this amazing person and whatnot, and how she kind of becomes infatuated with this couple. But it's also about a town sinking into madness. Well, at least that's what the synopsis says, but you don't really get much of the town sinking into madness until like the last 10% of the book, which was honestly very disappointing to me. And then some of the events that they talked about in the synopsis that were weird that happened were like tiny brief little mentions, and like you don't really get too much further into it. And if you had, I feel like it would have shown more of the town sinking into madness and like the why of these events, like why did that happen, but they never talk about why that happened. It mainly just revolves around Elodie and how she's obsessed with this couple, the ambassador and Violet, and it's kind of sad how obsessed she is. It's all around, the story is like just more hyper focused on her obsession and her delusion of what's going on, and it's told from her perspective as well. And I was looking more for a story that was gonna be about a town sinking into madness, and while I didn't dislike it, I didn't love it. This was like a 3-star read for me, and I just thought it was okay. I didn't think it was that great, but I didn't think it was bad. If you're looking for something that's more a little bit almost on the edge of like erotic, not overly so, but with a weird obsessive triangle of people, then you might like this more than I did. I think it was just because I was expecting something different from what I was led to believe by the synopsis, that it was kind of a little bit of a disappointment for me. The next thing I read was Scorch Grace by Margot Duehi, and this book is about a queer punk rock nun, and it is a mystery because somebody burnt up a wing of their school. Now, this Catholic school of the Sisters of the Sublime Blood. Sister Holiday is taking it on herself because the cops are not really doing a great job, neither are these investigators, that she's gonna stick her nose in everyone's business, whether she pisses people off or not. She's gonna find out who's doing this because it sets off a chain of events and other stuff starts catching fire and it keeps happening. I thought it was a really great mystery because I suspected everyone at some point. It was one of the people I suspected, but I suspected everyone, so I didn't do a very good job of figuring it out. I kind of had an idea towards the last quarter of the book, but I wasn't sure. You know, there's parts that are emotional and interesting, and it was kind of weird though with like how the nuns behaved. I had a little bit of a weird time getting into like how they're always like, praise God, God is good, and in that every other like time they would talk. I haven't had too much exposure to nuns and whatnot, so I don't really know how they behave besides the nun that lived in my friend's basement when I was a kid, and we didn't talk to her too much, so I don't know. Then I read a biography called Honey Baby Mine by Laura Dern and Diane Ladd. So Laura Dern is an actress that I like quite a bit. She's been in several of David Lynch's movies, and she always chooses really interesting roles, I found. And she was also in Twin Peaks: The Return as well. I like the roles that she chooses. They're always kind of like a little different and out there, and I always thought that was pretty cool, and I've just liked her. And so I saw this book was coming out, and it's her mom and her and their conversations about like life, love, loss, and dealing with stuff in their lifetimes. And her mom is diagnosed with like, she has problems with her lungs because she was exposed to this glyphosate stuff that was being sprayed around the town that she lived in. So they find out that if she can get her mom to walk and like help strengthen her lungs and stuff, that, you know, she's gonna live longer, because they only gave her like 6 months to live. So her and her mom would go on these walks, and they'd have these like just get into these serious life conversations, like all the stuff that maybe you want to know that you were ever too afraid to ask before, you know. And she asked about like the divorce with her mom and her dad. Her dad is Bruce Dern, which I didn't know. And Bruce Dern is in one of my favorite movies. It's like super old, called The Burbs. Rumsfeld in that movie. If you've ever seen The Burbs, with Tom Hanks and Corey Feldman and Carrie Fisher. It's freaking great. It's like, I guess, comedy, horror, thriller. I don't know what to describe that movie as, but it's funny and it's one of my favorites. It's from the 80s. But then they talk about her divorce, and I didn't know that Laura Dern was married to Ben Harper. Like, I love Ben Harper. I've seen him several times in concert, and she has 2 kids with him, and like they talk about like her and his divorce, and then just like loss and love and life, and it was really great. You get a little window into their lives, and it's always fascinating. I don't read biographies too often. There's not a ton of people I really care that much. Like, I would read a David Bowie biography, or Dave Grohl. Apparently guys named Dave, not just guys named Dave. Like, I read a Lady Gaga biography a long time ago, and just stuff about like more so musicians most of the time, but some actors and actresses. So every once in a while I like to throw one in there, and this was a good one. Also, if you're interested in any of these books, I will have links down below to that as well. Those are affiliate links, which is a great way to support the channel, and it also goes to support, obviously, the author and indie bookstores as well. And if you are a fan of videos where I talk about multiple books that I'm reading, the next video coming up will be a video about that. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.